There's a strength inside every woman that often doesn't show until life tries to break her apart. It's in the midnight tears no one sees, the prayers whispered under her breath, and the way she decides to rise again when everything inside her says she has no strength left. A strong woman doesn't just survive storms, she learns how to rebuild herself in the ruins. This isn't about having an audience cheering you on or someone holding your hand through the process. This is about standing in the mirror, looking at the pieces of your life, and deciding that you will not let brokenness define you. Because when God places his hand on a woman, even in her loneliness, she becomes a testimony that no valley can bury her, and no setback can silence her. The silent strength found in isolation is not the kind of strength that people applaud. It's not the strength you post about on social media. It's not the strength that gets validated by likes, hearts, or comments. It's the kind of strength that nobody sees but God. It's the strength that shows up when you've cried yourself to sleep and still have to get up in the morning to face life. It's the strength that whispers, "Keep going," when everything in you wants to lay down and quit. Isolation has a way of making you feel like you've been abandoned. You start to think that maybe you're being punished, maybe you're forgotten, maybe you're not as chosen as you once believed. But the truth is, isolation is often the very place God positions you so that the noise of the world doesn't drown out the sound of his voice. When everyone else is gone, when distractions are stripped away, that's when God begins to do his most intimate work in you. You see, we often mistake isolation for loneliness, but they are not the same. Loneliness is the pain of being without people, but isolation can be the strategy of being with God. Sometimes God removes the crowd so you can finally hear the clarity of heaven. A strong woman learns how to recognize that difference. She doesn't waste her wilderness wondering why no one came with her. Instead, she begins to see that maybe she wasn't supposed to bring anyone into this season. Because here's the truth, not everybody can handle the version of you that's being rebuilt. People loved you when you were strong for them, but they don't know what to do when you're broken, and God is making you strong for him. That's why God lets you sit alone for a while, not to punish you, but to protect the process. He's hiding you, covering you, and teaching you how to stand without leaning on the applause or validation of others. The silent strength found in isolation is also a refining fire. This is where your character gets reshaped. This is where your tears water the seeds of resilience. This is where your private prayers become the foundation of your public power. A strong woman understands that what is cultivated in secret will eventually shine in the open. That's why she doesn't despise her isolation. She begins to honor it. Think about it. Diamonds aren't made in crowds. They're formed under pressure, in hidden places. A seed doesn't sprout above ground until it's been buried in the dirt, unseen, unseen, unseen. And just like that, your strength is being built in the unseen, in the uncelebrated, in the unnoticed places of your life. It doesn't look glamorous, it doesn't feel rewarding, but it's necessary. Because when the season shifts, you won't be standing on shallow validation. You'll be rooted in the depth of what God taught you in silence. There is a weight to the silent strength in isolation. It forces you to confront who you really are when no one is watching. It strips away the performance, the masks, the need to be everything for everybody else. It leaves you with the raw version of you, the you that doubts, the you that questions, the you that feels weak. But that's the very version of you that God wants to strengthen. Because when you come out of isolation, it won't just be with a rebuilt life, it will be with a rebuilt soul. Embracing the breaking before the rebuilding is one of the hardest lessons a strong woman has to learn. Because we live in a world that tells us to rush to the fix, patch it up, smile for the camera, keep it moving, pretend like nothing ever happened. But the truth is, if you skip the breaking, you miss the very soil where God plants the new version of you. The breaking is not the enemy of your destiny, it's the birthing room of your transformation. There are seasons where you don't get to choose whether or not you break. Life comes in with losses, betrayals, disappointments, and the weight of expectations you can't carry anymore. And suddenly you're holding pieces of yourself you never thought you'd see scattered. A strong woman doesn't deny the breaking. She allows herself to feel it, to mourn it, to acknowledge that something inside her has shifted. Because you cannot rebuild what you refuse to admit is broken. The breaking is uncomfortable because it strips you of illusions. You thought you were in control, but the breaking shows you that control was always a myth. You thought certain people would never leave, but the breaking reveals that sometimes their exit was necessary for your growth. You thought your plan was perfect, but the breaking uncovers how God's plan was greater, even if it hurts. And this is where most people want to run, because it feels safer to numb yourself than to sit in the reality of being broken. But a strong woman doesn't run from it. She embraces it, because she knows that pain is the evidence that she's still alive. And as long as she's alive, God can still use her. Think of clay in the hands of a potter. When the vessel cracks, the potter doesn't throw it away. Instead, he breaks it down, presses it, reshapes it, and molds it again. The breaking is not the end of the vessel. It's the beginning of its transformation into something stronger, something more beautiful, something more aligned with the potter's vision. That's exactly what God does in the breaking moments of your life. He takes the places that shattered and uses them as the foundation for his masterpiece. But embracing the breaking also means releasing the shame of it. We've been taught to hide our brokenness, to act like we're always strong, always fine, always put together. But there is a sacred strength in saying, yes, I broke. Yes, I lost. Yes, I fell apart. Because when you tell the truth about your breaking, you give permission for God's grace to cover it. Grace doesn't meet the person you pretend to be. It meets the real you, the broken you, the unfiltered you. And here's the mystery. The breaking isn't just about what you lost. It's about what you're gaining. When you embrace the breaking, you gain clarity about who you really are, about what you really need, about who's really supposed to be in your life. You gain freedom from the weight of carrying things that were never meant to go with you into your next season. You gain intimacy with God, because nothing strips you down to raw faith like the moments when you don't have the answers, only his presence. A strong woman realizes that the breaking is not the end of her story, but the middle of her becoming. She doesn't rush through it. She leans into it. She allows the tears to cleanse her. She allows the silence to reset her. She allows the emptiness to be filled with something new. And in doing so, she begins to see that the breaking was not meant to destroy her, but to prepare her. It was the doorway to the rebuilding, the soil for the seed, the fire for the refining. And though she may not see it yet, she starts to recognize that this season of breaking is the evidence that God is setting the stage for a greater unveiling of her strength. Learning to trust God's vision when your own feels blurry is one of the most stretching seasons of a strong woman's life. Because let's be honest, we love to see the plan. We love to know the steps. We love to map out the timeline. But what happens when the vision you had for your life doesn't line up with what you're living? What happens when you thought you'd be further by now, happier by now, married by now, healed by now, and instead you're standing in a place that doesn't look anything like what you prayed for? That's when trusting God's vision becomes more than a pretty phrase. It becomes survival. Blurry seasons are frustrating because they test your faith in ways you never expected. You wake up every day trying to figure out if you're even on the right path. You wonder if you missed a turn somewhere, if you misunderstood what God was saying, if maybe you disqualified yourself along the way. But here's the truth. Blurry doesn't mean broken. Just because you can't see it clearly doesn't mean God isn't guiding you. Sometimes he clouds your vision so you will stop leaning on your sight and start leaning on his voice. Think about how God led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He didn't give them a detailed map with every stop and every turn. He gave them a cloud by day and fire by night. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew who they were following. That's what it means to trust God's vision when your own feels blurry. It means letting go of the need to see the whole picture and learning to follow step by step, moment by moment, whisper by whisper. A strong woman learns that blurry seasons require different posture. Instead of controlling, she surrenders. Instead of striving, she listens. Instead of forcing, she flows. And it doesn't mean she never questions or never doubts, but it means that even in her doubt, she chooses to keep moving. She understands that clarity often comes in hindsight, but obedience has to happen in the now. You may not know why God is asking you to release that relationship, why he's telling you to move in silence, why he closed the door you wanted so badly, but trust means you take the step without seeing the staircase. The challenge of blurry vision is that it makes you feel like you've lost control, but maybe that's the point. Because control was never yours to keep. You were never meant to carry the weight of orchestrating every detail of your destiny. Trusting God's vision strips you of that illusion and teaches you to lean into the one who knows the end from the beginning. And even when the middle looks messy, even when the picture is unclear, he's still the author and he's still writing. And there's something sacred about the blurry seasons too. They birth intimacy with God because you learn to listen for him in ways you wouldn't if everything was crystal clear. You start to notice his presence in small ways, the peace that settles when you should be panicking, the random encouragement that finds you when you're about to give up, the opportunities that align in ways you could have never manufactured. You begin to realize that his vision isn't always about seeing ahead. Sometimes it's about seeing him in the here and now. Trusting God's vision when yours feels blurry is also about giving up the idol of certainty. We think certainty will give us peace, but sometimes certainty robs us of dependence. If you knew every detail, you wouldn't need faith, and without faith, you can't grow. A strong woman chooses to lean into faith even when her eyes can't focus. She chooses to believe that God knows something she doesn't, that he sees something she can't, that he's working something she can't imagine. And even when her steps feel unsteady, she keeps walking because she knows the one who holds her is steady. Rebuilding with boundaries, not just bravery, is the turning point where a strong woman learns that courage alone is not enough to sustain her. Because bravery can get you out of the storm, but boundaries will keep you from walking right back into the same chaos you just escaped. Bravery makes you fight, but boundaries teach you to protect what you fought for. And for many women, rebuilding is not just about putting the pieces back together. It's about making sure those pieces are no longer accessible to people, patterns, and places that broke them in the first place. When life shatters you, there's something inside that wants to prove to the world you can bounce back. That's bravery. You push through the tears, you show up, you handle business, you make it work. But without boundaries, that same bravery becomes reckless. You start over, but you don't guard your space. You pour out, but you don't protect your energy. You rebuild, but you let the same people who dismantled your peace have access again. And before you know it, you're not rebuilding, you're recycling the same pain in a different season. A strong woman realizes that boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They're gates to decide what love gets in. Boundaries are not selfish, they are sacred. They are the markers that say, this is what God rebuilt in me, and I will not let it be contaminated again. When you've been broken deeply, you start to value your healing in a different way. You stop giving discounts on your peace. You stop negotiating with your worth. You stop apologizing for the lines you draw because you realize those lines are the very things keeping you whole. Rebuilding with boundaries means learning how to say no without explaining yourself, how to rest without guilt, how to walk away without needing approval. It means understanding that everyone can't go where you're going, and that doesn't make them bad. It just means their access was seasonal, not permanent. And when you stop forcing permanent access to seasonal people, you save yourself from unnecessary breaking. Bravery may push you to forgive quickly, but boundaries teach you not to forget the lesson. Bravery makes you show up strong, but boundaries remind you that strength is also saying, I won't allow myself to be drained. Bravery shouts, I can do it all, but boundaries whisper, I don't have to do it all alone. And it's that whisper that carries you into a healthier version of yourself, a version that's not just strong for the moment, but sustained for the future. Boundaries also reset the way you see yourself. Because without them, you end up teaching people how to mishandle you. Every time you say yes when you should have said no, you reinforce the lie that your needs don't matter. Every time you overextend yourself to keep the peace, you reinforce the lie that your value comes from being useful instead of being whole. But when you start drawing boundaries, you send a message to yourself and to the world that you are worth protecting, that you are worth preserving, that what God placed inside you is too precious to be mishandled. And yes, boundaries will cost you. They will cost you relationships that only thrived off your lack of them. They will cost you opportunities that required you to compromise yourself. They will cost you versions of you that were addicted to people pleasing. But what you gain is far greater. You gain peace, you gain clarity, you gain the freedom to rebuild without the constant threat of sabotage from the same cycles you once lived in. Boundaries are the locks on the doors of your healing, and a strong woman doesn't apologize for locking what God restored. Because rebuilding isn't just about being brave enough to rise again. It's about being wise enough to guard the ground you stand on. It's about recognizing that courage gets you to the door, but boundaries keep the door shut to everything that doesn't serve the new you. And when a strong woman learns to rebuild with boundaries, she stops living on defense and starts living on purpose. Finding power in vulnerability, not perfection, is one of the most countercultural revelations a strong woman will ever embrace. Because society will tell you that your strength is in how flawless you look, how much you can handle, how well you can hold it all together. But perfection is a mask, and masks suffocate. Vulnerability is the place where God breathes life into you again. Perfection says, I have to be untouchable to be worthy. Vulnerability says, I am enough even in my weakness, because God's strength is made perfect here. A strong woman doesn't come into her power by pretending her cracks don't exist. She finds her power when she allows God's light to shine through those very cracks. Vulnerability doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're real. And being real is where healing begins. Because you can't heal from what you hide, you can only heal from what you're willing to reveal. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit, I don't have it all together, but I'm still showing up. We've been conditioned to think perfection earns us love, but vulnerability invites true connection. People can admire your perfection, but they can only relate to your vulnerability. And a strong woman learns that her testimony doesn't come from how perfect her journey looks, but from how God kept her when she was falling apart. Her story isn't powerful because it's polished, it's powerful because it's honest. Vulnerability transforms your scars into stories that set other women free. Perfection isolates you. Vulnerability connects you. When you're chasing perfection, you feel like you're constantly performing, constantly proving, constantly pretending. It becomes exhausting to hold up an image of strength when inside you're weary. But vulnerability gives you permission to rest, to exhale, to let people see you cry without apologizing, to let someone know you're struggling without feeling like you failed. That's where the power lies, not in the pretending, but in the permission to be human while God remains divine. Vulnerability also opens the door for God's grace to flow in a deeper way. Because grace doesn't meet the polished version of you, it meets the authentic you. It doesn't cover your pretend strength, it covers your real weakness. And when you stop striving for perfection and start surrendering in vulnerability, you find that God's power begins to show up in ways you could never have orchestrated. Suddenly, the things you thought disqualified you become the very things God uses to qualify you for the next level of purpose. And here's the paradox. The very thing you're afraid will make people look down on you is often the thing that will lift them up. When you share your brokenness, someone else realizes they're not alone. When you admit your fears, someone else finds the courage to confront theirs. When you confess your doubts, someone else learns that faith isn't about never doubting. It's about trusting God in the middle of the doubt. Vulnerability makes your life a mirror, not of perfection, but of possibility. A strong woman learns that perfection is fragile, but vulnerability is unbreakable. Because perfection can be shattered the moment you fail, but vulnerability is honest enough to absorb the failure and keep moving. Perfection has to keep proving, but vulnerability just keeps living. Perfection demands applause, but vulnerability inspires transformation. And when you step into that truth, you realize that the greatest power you carry is not in being untouchable, but in being real enough for God's power to touch you and flow through you. When a woman decides that she doesn't have to perform her strength anymore, she becomes truly strong. She realizes that she doesn't have to build a life that looks flawless. She has to build a life that feels free. She doesn't have to keep every mask in place. She has to allow herself to be known in the rawest, most authentic way. And in that authenticity, she discovers that her power was never in her perfection. It was always in her willingness to be vulnerable and let God make her whole in places she thought would always stay broken. Becoming the evidence of God's restoration is when a strong woman finally realizes that her story was never just about her survival, it was about His glory. Because the truth is, God doesn't just rebuild you for you, He rebuilds you so that when people see you, they see what He can do. Restoration is not just returning to what was lost. Restoration is God multiplying, elevating, and transforming until your life becomes a testimony that no one can deny. You become the walking proof that what the enemy tried to destroy, God turned into destiny. When you've been broken, when you've walked through isolation, when you've embraced the breaking, when you've trusted God in the blurry seasons, when you've rebuilt with boundaries, when you've found power in vulnerability, suddenly you don't just talk about faith, you embody it. You become the living evidence that God's hand was on you all along. People look at your life and wonder how you made it, how you didn't lose your mind, how you didn't stay stuck in bitterness. And the only answer is grace. Restoration is different from recovery. Recovery means getting back to where you were. Restoration means being elevated beyond where you've ever been. God doesn't just patch up the holes and put you back on the same level. He builds something in you that is greater, deeper, and stronger than before. A strong woman who has been restored doesn't just survive her past. She uses it as the foundation of her future. She carries wisdom in her scars, strength in her tears, and vision in her healing. She doesn't hide the evidence of what she's been through. She wears it as a crown because it testifies to the God who never left her. Becoming the evidence of God's restoration means you stop explaining yourself to people and start pointing them to Him. You no longer need validation because your life itself is the validation. You no longer need to prove your worth because your survival already proved His power. And what once embarrassed you becomes the very thing that empowers you. The places you thought were your downfall become the platform for your destiny. The areas where you thought you were disqualified become the qualifications God uses to minister through you. But restoration is not just about what people see, it's about what you know. You know what it feels like to be empty. And now you know what it feels like to be filled. You know what it feels like to be overlooked. And now you know what it feels like to be chosen. You know what it feels like to be broken down. And now you know what it feels like to be built back up by the hand of God. That knowledge is sacred because it becomes the fuel that keeps you walking in purpose when others would have quit. It keeps you humble. It keeps you grateful. It keeps you dependent on the one who brought you out. Restoration also carries a responsibility, because when God makes you the evidence, He's not just giving you a testimony, He's giving you an assignment. You don't just get restored to sit silently, you get restored to shine. Someone else needs to see that healing is possible. Someone else needs to know that heartbreak is not the end. Someone else needs to believe that God can still take ashes and create beauty. And sometimes your life is the only sermon they'll ever hear. Your resilience is the only scripture they'll ever read. Your restoration is the only proof they'll ever need that God is real. A strong woman who becomes the evidence of God's restoration doesn't walk around flaunting perfection. She walks around radiating presence. There's a glow, there's a peace, there's a strength that can't be faked. People can sense that something about her has been touched by heaven. And even if they don't know the details of her story, they know there's a God behind her glory. That is what it means to be the evidence. Not that you are flawless, but that you are fearless enough to live out loud as proof of his faithfulness.